Gentlemen, I'm thrilled to tell you that Connor Beaton is here today. I've been hearing his name for years. People have been saying, do you know Connor? Do you know Connor? And finally, we're connecting today. So it is a true honor for me and something I've been looking forward to. A little background on Connor Beaton is that he has been married for 4 years, has an almost 2-year-old. Some who know him well would know he is an accomplished opera singer. I use the word accomplished specifically. I found Connor's work a couple years ago, but more recently have dug into his incredible podcast, ManTalks. It's he has an incredible organization that focuses on wellness and success and fulfillment for men, clearly something I am drawn to. And when I learned about Connor's story, he is a guy who turned pain into purpose. That's very evident in the beginning of the book. Connor, you were raw and real, and I really appreciated that. And on that note, I'm holding a copy of Men's Work right now, a hard copy nonetheless. It's all marked up. It's got tabs. It's got underlines. It's got questions written on the side. It's a good book. And I wanted to get you on the show here to talk about this and bring this book to our community because our guys are going to absolutely love you if they don't already know you. So welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I was going to say I was an accomplished opera singer. That was in the past, but I appreciate that. Everyone's always usually a little taken back by the fact that I sang classical music for a number of years.
So let me hang on that one for just a minute. Where did that begin? Where did the interest start?
So, in the book, I talk about this unconscious pursuit of trying to get to know a little bit better. My parents got divorced when I was 3, and I got to see him once or twice a month. And he, growing up, he worked for the federal government. But when I was probably about 10 or 11, he started singing. I grew up in northern Alberta in Canada, and he started singing for the Edmonton Opera in the chorus, sort of like in the background and whatnot. And so I grew up, kind of hearing about his passion doing this. And when after I graduated high school, I was like 18, 19. I had some really terrible jobs. I, delivered water for a company called Culligan. I worked construction, worked in the gravel pits in northern Alberta, which was terrible, minus 50 in the winters and, plus 35 in the summers. And on the side, to try and get closer to him a little bit, I started taking music lessons. He and I had this conversation. And he said, why don't you go and sing? I always loved music. I had never taken any lessons. I had never sang. I had never played piano. I had never played an instrument. And so I just started taking some lessons and found that I had a knack for it. And I was half decent. And I started doing some competitions. I, sang in the chorus with him. And then it kind of started to take off. And I noticed that my life started to narrow in. I couldn't party as much. I couldn't smoke. I was smoking at the time because I was working construction. And I was, 19, 20 years old. And so my focus started to narrow in as a kid, as a young man. And I just decided to run with that. I was this wild, young man going to the bars on the weekends and getting into bar fights and, womanizing and drinking my face off, riding my motorcycle. I had 1,000cc, crotch rocket, and I had a, 95 5-liter Mustang. And here I was on the evenings, on the weekends, doing fucking opera rehearsal and singing classical music. And then I pursued it, and I went and got a degree in music, and it took me into some really cool places. I got to go and perform in Italy and Germany and Czech Republic and China, and all over North America. And then I realized that the career really wasn't for me, but it was incredible. It was an incredible experience. And so, but it was at first this way for me to spend a little bit more time with my dad and try and understand him. And I didn't really realize it at first. But in hindsight, it was one of those things where I was like, oh, that's why I was pursuing that.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And when you were just articulating, you got this 1,000cc crotch rocket and then you're singing opera, in the evenings, that seems like quite the range. And I'm wondering, was that one of the first times that you really stepped into the expansiveness of your dark and your light, perhaps the rougher side and maybe the more elegant side of life?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's been a part of my life that has always brought this dichotomy to the table, this sort of natural juxtaposition of existence where I grew up because my parents got divorced when I was so young. They both remarried and they both had a daughter. So they both got remarried when I was 6 to other people. And then they both had a daughter when I was 7. And then they both had a son when I was 10 and 11. And so
Wow.
I grew up bouncing between these two family systems that were relatively identical in terms of, my parents were all the same age, my siblings were all the same age. But they were polar opposites. Like my mom and my stepmom, polar opposite. My dad, my stepdad, polar opposite. So I kind of grew up between this juxtaposition of character. And as a child, um, I really had a wide range even growing up. I loved to go play in the dirt, but I also just loved to, kick back and play video games. And I also loved to go listen to music, whether it was Michael Jackson or the Beastie Boys or whatever it was. I think I've always kind of had this passion to try and experience the fullness of life. That's kind of been baked into my DNA and hardware. But I think for sure that period in my early 20s was when I really started to explore, my own dark masculine qualities. I mean, I was street racing my motorcycle. I was stunting my motorcycle, doing wheelies on the highway and shit like that. I had 2-inch metal spikes. I had a mohawk on my helmet, and it was bright yellow and I had custom exhaust on it. So it was just
Dude, this is so
brutally
hard to
loud.
imagine.
Oh, it's wild. It's wild. And so, and I would roll up to opera rehearsal on this fucking motorcycle. And people are like, what is going on? I'm like doing a wheelie through the parking lot. But, there was a part of me that kind of liked this enigmatic, mysterious nature where no one could really figure me out because I couldn't figure me out. I didn't really know who I was. And that really was the story of my life for a number of years, was me trying to figure out who am I in the world, having grown up between these two families where I just didn't really know where I fit in. And I think that's the case for a lot of young men today. I think a lot of young men in our society really don't know where they belong, and they don't know where they fit in, and they don't know how to find a sense of purpose or meaning in life, or where they can contribute meaningfully in a way that's going to leave them fulfilled, but also, provide for them financially. And so, I think part of what I've always tried to do is keep one foot in that young man, in who he was and what he was grappling with and what he was struggling with, because I still think that there's a large tether to what a lot of young men and what a lot of the youth are going through today. And I say youth, I'm 39. So it's not like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not like I'm like 80 and I'm talking to, about generations past.
It's interesting to think about it's interesting to think about what you said there about how did you word this? It was like you kind of enjoyed the fact that people couldn't figure you out. Did you say it that way?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to
Yeah,
put words in your mouth. Yeah, that's right.
And the enigmatic. Yeah.
I can really relate to that because I was not only drawn to that in myself of not being able to figure myself out, felt like a puzzle that I could just keep trying to put together, but that I definitely felt as a young man and still do that because that young man is still part of who I am today. Acknowledge when he shows up, when that archetype shows up for me. I have a tattoo on my back. I don't think I've ever said this on the show, but I got it when I was 18, and half of the face is kind of, you can see it's clearly a face. It's kind of angry, which would probably represent how I felt at 18. And then the other side of it, though, is just random tribal art. And I used to draw half a face all the time because the way I felt was that there's this part that we project to the world, like half of us that we might reveal to the world of like, here's what people see. But then there's this other side that nobody really knows. It's random, it's chaotic, it's mysterious, it's unknown. And that's how I felt around that time of my life. And not only was it challenging, but it was also exciting. And I do feel there was a draw to that. Like I almost didn't want to figure it out. And I didn't want people to figure me out because that would then equal death or completion or boring.
Yeah. It's very mythological, right? What you're talking about, which I think is important because a lot of our lives aren't so linear. And as men, we're told to really over-index the rational mind when a lot of the connection of our own maturation, right? Of us maturing into fathers, of us maturing into elders, they're myth-based, they're story-based. Our lives are following a kind of arc or a narrative, and we often don't know where we are in that narrative. And
Mhm.
I think that all of us as men, especially in the modern culture that we live in, there's this there's this archetype called puer aeternus, and there's many psychologists in the early 20th century that talked about it. But puer aeternus essentially is Latin for the eternal boy, and within all of us as men is this eternal boy, right? It's Peter Pan. And if we're not cognizant of that part of us, it can really cause a lot of damage in our life. And I think when I look at a lot of the men that I work with, whether they're in their 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s, in my work today, regardless of how much success that they've had, oftentimes some of the battle that they're fighting is that their younger self is either trying to have a say in their life because he's felt rejected, or he's still running the show, in a man's marriage and in the way that he parents his kids, and sometimes men, they struggle. Sometimes we struggle, because I'm not exempt from this, to really be the type of grounded, mature father that our children need, because we still feel like a kid inside. We still feel immature in some ways. And so, I think we need to acknowledge that. But I think generally speaking, just from a male culture perspective, we're sort of grappling with this eternal boy that seems to be showing up in our culture and causing havoc, because there's a lack of really solid father energy within our culture, within our homes. And I mean, just as an example, 1 in 4 kids in America will grow up without a father in the house, right? Or without any father figure. And you can extend that to, when a child goes to school, there's an absence of male modeling. There's an absence of male presence, right? Because it's like 32 to 38% of teachers are male. And then you look at the therapeutic industry, and the therapeutic industry only has 29% male psychologists. And so I think a lot of the spaces where men heal, there is a vacuum of male modeling. And so, of course, many of us struggle to move out of this sort of puer aeternus, this, sort of eternal boy, because we don't have to, and we're not seeing the modeling of what it looks like
Mhm.
to move beyond that. And so all of a sudden we become men who, like myself, in my late 20s, had success, had acquired some of the toys, had acquired, was traveling the world, had this amazing girlfriend, but I was a shit show. I was a complete disaster, and I didn't want real responsibility. I was abusing porn and substances, and I was cheating constantly with any woman that would give me attention and validation. It was a complete wreck. And in large part, not to sort of put blame on anyone, but that is a byproduct of not having really solid, mature, masculine energy in our lives to say enough and provide some order and
Yes.
provide some modeling of what it can look like to not be that.
Yeah. Man, I really want to talk about the freedom in the freedom in a framework. I feel like having models or men in our life that can say, that can hold us accountable, that can give us some structure, that can call us up, or call us in, or however we want to phrase that, and at the same time let us fall down and bump our knees. Let me all right, I'm going to seed that, and that probably work its way into the entire conversation. But what you just said is a perfect transition for something that I read in your book that I wanted to bring up, and I'm so glad that you just teed this up perfectly. So on page 1 of the introduction, it says the work of men begins with pain, and then it goes on, and this was so really interesting, right? It's I am a man who has been abused. I'm a man who has abused others, or said another way, I'm a man who is hurting or has been hurt. I am a man who has hurt others or is hurting others. So I was wondering if you could unpack that a little bit and maybe talk to us about, how that might have played into your life, or what you've seen in others, however you want to take that, but how maybe you have been hurt and hurt others. I know you just alluded to a little bit of it, but I want to spend some time in this area of men's work beginning with pain.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of different ways that we can come at this. I think from a very direct way, there's a great saying from a American psychologist or American therapist named Francis Weller. He says, your pain has its own intelligence.
Mm,
And Jung talks about this notion, Carl Jung talks about this notion of the shadow, which I write extensively about in the
yes.
book, because I think shadow work is arguably the single most important thing that a man can undertake in his life.
And quickly, Connor, for anybody who is not familiar with that term, shadow work.
Yeah. So the shadow is essentially the part of you that you store all the stuff that you don't like, right? Your insecurities, your fears, your doubts, the choices that you've made that you don't want other people to know about, your sort of self-judgment and self-criticism. It's all of those different pieces, right? The abuse that you maybe experienced in childhood, but have never talked about, whether it was emotional or verbal or physical or sexual. The amount of men I've come to learn over the last decade, I've really been fortunate to work with tens of thousands of guys from all over the world, and the amount of men that are carrying pain, whether it's through the form of abuse or heartbreak or, losing a parent when they were young or whatever it is, that are carrying pain that has never been dealt with, never been talked about, never been addressed, is astronomically high. And so the shadow, to just sort of tie this back in, the shadow is the part of us that we try and hide all that stuff. It's like our internal hurt locker. And as men, a lot of guys have bought into this notion that I'm stronger as a man if I can just suppress things. If I can, if I feel depressed, I'll just push that shit down and, have a gin and tonic and not worry about it, or light a joint and try and numb it out. If I'm anxious, same thing, I'll just smoke a little bit more weed and feel better, or jerk off and watch porn, but I'm not going to talk about it. If I'm struggling in my business or my marriage is really struggling, I'm not going to talk about those things. So we've bought into this really terrible rule that I call the one rule of men in the book, which is the one rule of men is don't talk about what it's like to be a man who's struggling or suffering. And so this is what many men do to try and create the appearance of strength. And what that does is it creates and strengthens our shadow. It strengthens our insecurities, our inferiorities, our perceived weaknesses, the emotions that we don't like, right? For some guys, their anger is in their shadow, their anxiousness is in their shadow, their fears is in their shadow. And the shadow is the part of you that is going to get in the way of your goals and your aims. So if you're trying to lose 10 pounds, but you can't get out of bed in the morning, go work out, and your excuses keep getting in the way and you keep hitting snooze and you're packing down the potato chips, at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and you're shaming yourself, that's the shadow. That's the part of you that you're really dealing with. And so when I say that a man's work begins in pain, what I really mean is your work as a man, whether you like it or not, whether you want to admit it or not, whether you're ready for it or not, requires that you turn towards the shit in your life that is uncomfortable, that you don't want to deal with, and that you don't want to talk about, and that you don't want to feel.
Yeah.
And the men that are able to do those things are much more whole and complete and mature men. It doesn't mean that they've had an easier life. It means that they've had a more fulfilling and rich life because they've been willing to sort of walk into the cave of their own psyche and their own emotional body. And I'll wrap this all up by saying one thing. There's a researcher who, I can't remember exactly what the name of his organization is. It's over at the UK, I believe, and he specifically studies men. And they've been studying for over a decade, trying to figure out what is the most sort of satisfying thing that we as men can do, what actually gives us a deep sense of fulfillment in life. And his name is Dr. John Barry. And what they've found through the research is that the number one thing that leaves a man feeling fulfilled is self-improvement, right? It's self-improvement.
Mm.
And so when I say a man's work begins in pain, it means that we start to address the shit that we don't like about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
The way that we talk to ourselves, the way that we beat ourselves up, the unrealistic expectations that we put onto ourselves, need perfect for our children or our colleagues, our coworkers, our wives, our girlfriends, etc. And we begin to address that kind of stuff, and we begin to model what it looks like to be a man who is willing to work on himself and not need to be seen as perfect, but can model a man who admits his flaws and shows young men and other men what it looks like to be a man who deals with his flaws.
Yeah, man, this topic of when to open up and when to shut the fuck up is one I wrestle with. And here's kind of my journey with this. I'd love to get your take on it. There's been a time when I didn't open up, and then I did, and I was like, yes, vulnerability is the way. Open up, share your heart. Like, don't carry this all yourself. And I saw the benefit of revealing what was inside. Then I went through a period where I think I revealed too much and I was dumping, I was like, I was like, oh, I think this is a lot for people, whoever. It could be friends, marriage, whatever. It's like, oh, there's a dark side to revealing too, right? Or not everybody's your therapist. Not everybody's paid to, not everybody's getting paid to listen to you reveal now that you've got this new shiny toy of like unveiling your heart. And then I've kind of switched back into, well, maybe I should just stop talking when I'm triggered or when I'm angry. Right? Maybe what I need to do is go process on my own and then come back and reveal the lessons I've learned and reveal, hey, this is why I was feeling this way. I was sad and I realized I can take responsibility here. And that's how we can reveal. But there isn't a day that goes by in my life right now, Connor, where I don't wrestle with, is this a moment where I should just keep my mouth shut? Or I should open up and be honest and reveal. I mean, literally, I could walk you through my entire day driving my 13-year-old to school. Same thing. How much do I just let him listen to music and be a teenager and just enjoy the ride or whatever it is and like not pester him with questions or insights or feel like I've got to be, maybe that's my own insecurity. Like I got to connect with him. I've only got so many more years, but I'm projecting all this like fear and like, am I a good enough dad onto my son? I could just give him some space. Or maybe I'm just checked out, and you hear other stories of like, you got to engage, you got to ask difficult questions, you got to push a little bit. I'm like, it just on and on and on. Even with my team, how much advice, how many questions, how much do I just let them go and run the business and just hands off? So dude, this is my greatest challenge right now.
Well, first off, I love the way that you articulated it. And I think you just spoke the truth that is in the hearts and the minds of so many men. What we're really talking about here, I think we can just sort of distill this down, is the importance of understanding when to just be. We are such doing creatures as men, and we're so externally focused that, we've been taught that our value and our worth is predicated on what we can do. And to some extent, there's truth in that, right? If we're not going out in the world and producing and performing and building and creating and earning and providing, whether that's safety or security or finances or whatever, then society and the world is going to perceive us as having less value, right, in some capacity, because we as men, we need to produce that value. And I think there's it's a sort of a controversial statement, I think, in some circles, but I think what we're really talking about is the value of just being. And this is incredibly hard for most of us as men, to just be with our emotions, to just be with our suffering, to just be with our kids, when they're on their phones and they're distracted and we're having the internal experience of like, oh, I feel a little lonely right now. Or, oh, should I be doing something? Should I be lecturing them about social media? Or should I be engaging them about how their schoolwork is going or whether they're dating somebody? And it's actually our internal discomfort as men with our inability to really be deeply present to our own internal experience. And this is what I see so many men grappling with. This is what I still grapple with often, because two things. One, culture, for the most part, has, for better or for worse, been built in a way that has become incredibly domesticating for us as men. Life is very easy. Life is very comfortable. And when I say easy, I don't mean that we don't have to work, right? Men are out there really crushing and killing themselves to just make a living in a lot of ways. But when I say easy, I mean, you don't have to really push You can just lay back and watch Netflix. You don't have to, you don't have to hunt and forage anymore, right? You're just sort of, you go to the grocery store and find it. And so I think for a lot of us, domestication is our killer. And I
Yeah.
think the other thing is that we are wildly distracted. And so most of the men that I interact with, their challenge and hurdle is that they just live in their head. They haven't connected to their heart. They haven't connected to their body in so long. They haven't connected to their nervous system. So they don't actually know how to just be in any given moment with their kids or with their employees or with themselves. And a lot of the times this is because we as men, we feel, right? The majority, I think one of the interesting facts that I found is that the amygdala, which is the sort of like emotional reaction center within our brains, is much larger within men than it is in women. And so we have a greater propensity towards larger, more intense internal experiences,
Mm.
whether that's anger or anxiety or fear or worry or whatever it is. And so the truth is that many men are carrying around a really intense charge internally, a charge of discontent, a charge of anxiousness, a charge of anger, a charge of confusion, and they don't know how to deal with that intensity living within them. And so we have to practice just being, not doing, not connecting our value and worth to, well, fuck, if I'm not doing something right now, then I don't have value. No. Can you practice being in the moment with your kid and just being so present to what you're experiencing and what you're feeling that you're modeling being present
Yeah.
as a father and as a man? And that will hopefully start to pull them into your sphere, because presence has a kind of magnetic quality. If you've ever been
Yeah.
around somebody that just has a deep presence, you feel drawn into it.
Yes.
So maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah. So you seem to me to be super even keeled, right? Like it just super even keeled. Now you paint a picture of a Connor that had a lot of dynamic and dark elements as a young, but now I see this very poised podcast host. And I was telling you before we hit record that I was listening to the show with you and your wife, and she just put out a book too, right?
She did. Yeah, it launched yesterday.
Yeah. So congrats to both of you. But I was saying to you that I was so impressed by how poised you were and how you handled that conversation, because I think I would have been like super passive aggressive with my wife. Like I was just thinking about the energy with my wife versus listening to you. It was a great model, by the way, for me. My question to you is, if somebody really knows Connor, if somebody really, really knows you, what do they know about your relationship to anger, to the intensity? Because outwardly, man, it looks like nothing's going to phase you.
Yeah, well, things definitely phase me. And, I genuinely have had to work really hard, to be honest. I have had to work tirelessly because, all of my porn watching, alcohol drinking, weed smoking, womanizing behavior was a byproduct of me having so much charge internally, so much intensity. Some of it was because of my childhood trauma. I did experience verbal and emotional abuse, sometimes physical abuse as a kid. And so anytime that we experience trauma of any form, whether it's the big capital T trauma of sexual abuse, or seeing a parent die, or an accident or something like that, or the little T trauma of bullied and verbally abused and stuff like that, what it does is it creates an energy in our body, an excess of energy that we don't know how to deal with. And when people have panic attacks and anxiety attacks and PTSD, what's happening is that their neurology, first and foremost, their brain, but also their nervous system, is getting lit up. It's getting put on high alert. So your whole body all of a sudden just starts to, it's like a gong going off internally in your body. And so, I had to work really hard to learn to work with my own charge and the intensity that I would feel sometimes, because I did feel things really intensely. I felt boredom intensely. I felt loneliness intensely. I felt anger really intense. I still do, but I've worked really hard to move away from the medicating tactics that I was using, right? The coping mechanisms that I was using of porn and alcohol and weed and women and whatnot, to try and deal with that internal charge towards more meditative rituals. And this is what I talk about in the book, is that we need to move from a medicated way of being as men to a meditative way of being. And we need to learn how to work with this energy. And so, I've spent over a decade doing yoga, doing meditation practices, studying Buddhism, doing Tai Chi, doing breath work, doing cold immersion, learning about polyvagal theory, right? I mean, I've really immersed myself in trying to prioritize my own presence, because what I've realized is that your presence as a man, right? Your presence, your undistracted consciousness is a fucking gift to the world. And it is a natural resource that is not only in high demand, but not a lot of men know how to mine. And so if you can become a man who can start to cultivate that type of undistracted consciousness when your wife is talking to you or when your kids are talking to you, and you're not like, okay, how the fuck do I solve this problem? And like, what am I going to do? And da, 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 and your brain's going a mile a minute. You're not really there with them and their experience. And so if you can begin to implement practices that can cultivate this gift in your life, your whole life will start to change. And I noticed this for myself. The more that I've moved towards this grounded, centered place, the more that opportunities have opened up in my life. My sex life has changed. My marriage has changed. I mean, my relationships have changed. My ability to just be with friends and family have changed. But that doesn't mean that I'm flawless. Okay. So I'll give you a perfect example. My son didn't sleep through the night for 18 months. And let me tell you, for any of the dads that are out there, maybe you've experienced this. There is, for me, nothing more frustrating and more infuriating for some reason than my son waking up for the third time at night and just like, rage inducing, like, why the fuck won't this kid sleep? And like, there's almost like this arrogance that starts to kind of like, doesn't he know that I have shit tomorrow? And they're like, I can't perform, or da, da, da. And this whole story kind of starts to go on inside. And so, for the first 17 months, that was something that I really grappled with, because during the day, totally fine. I mean, you could business problems, no problem. Shit with friends, no problem. I could deal with that. All the stuff. But 3 o'clock in the morning came around and my son was up for the third or fourth time. And I mean, I just wanted to rage. I wanted to put holes in the walls. And so, so it still comes up. It's still something that that I deal with, because here's the thing. Maybe I'll end on this. For the most part, we as men have been taught to do two things with our internal experience, specifically when it's intense and when it's something that we think we don't want, right? So the first thing is shut it down. That's what most of us have been taught. Shut it down, push it down, stuff it down. Don't fucking deal with it, numb it out. If you're angry, if you feel rage, if you feel anxiety, if you feel fear, and you don't want to feel that, you just ignore that shit, push it down, soldier on. The second thing that we do is we react from that emotional state. We become the anger, we become the anxiousness, we become the fear. And then we react from that place, and then we have to go back and clean up our mess. But we don't have to deal with our internal state from that dichotomy. We can be present to our internal experience without needing to react from it. But we have to be able to practice this, right? This isn't like a skill that people are born with, right? This is a skill that you're going to have to practice, right? This discernment, to pause and say, okay, what am I actually experiencing? I'm getting reactive right now. Okay. I can see the signs in my body. I can feel the energy building up in my chest. I can feel my face getting flushed. I can hear my voice getting louder. I can hear the words that I'm saying are more aggressive and more attacking and more berating, so we have to get very clear on what are our specific signs that we're either starting to shut down or we're starting to react from that internal state. And I still have to practice that with my wife, with my son, you know, when he's throwing blueberries at the white wall of our brand new house. And I'm like, oh, you little bastard. Like, you know, and sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not, but I still have to practice that in those moments.
Is this ultimately, I mean, are we ultimately talking about alchemizing these moments? Is this processing? Like we're not going to stuff it down and we're not going to become that and explode. We have tools to then process. And maybe step one, if that's true, is to be aware of the triggers. This is what's happening. This is the sequence. I can see the pattern occurring. This is, you know,
Yes.
And then through that, we are present enough to process it. Is that what we're saying?
Yes. Yeah.
You have
to bring consciousness into your experience. And this is the process of processing. I guess that's what we could call it. Yes.
And that's what I want to make sure I'm getting is like, how do we alchemize it? If we're not stuffing it and we're not becoming it, then what does the alchemy look like?
Yeah. So I would probably say four steps. Okay. Maybe a bonus one. So the first one is get very clear on the signs. So you might want to write down, and I walk guys through some of this process in the book just to sort of have it be very clear. But the first step is get familiar with the signs. What do you hear yourself saying? What do you see yourself doing? What does it feel like specifically in the body? Right?
I wonder if our spouses or friends could help us with that. Like
totally.
could we ask them like, hey, when you start to see me, like what happens? Do my nostrils flare? Do my ears twitch? Like what happens?
Well, my wife, just as an aside, my wife used to say, I can tell when you're getting angry because this part of your nose starts to twitch. And
yes. It's the tell. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. So number one is signs.
Yeah. Step number one, get very clear on the signs of whether you're shutting down or you're starting to become reactive. Step number two is name it out loud. Say it out loud. I'm getting reactive. I'm getting angry. I feel anxious. I feel, you know, whatever it is, name it out loud. Or at the very least, if you don't feel comfortable doing that in that moment with that person, because maybe you're talking to your boss or whatever, at least say it to yourself internally. I'm getting angry. Right?
Yeah.
Because for the most part, here's the real kicker. And when I started to realize this really helped me. When we as men say things like, oh, I just lost it. You know, I just lost it. What are you actually saying, right? What we're actually saying is I lost my conscious capacity to respond. I lost consciousness.
That's
right. I literally became that reactive emotion.
Totally.
So we have to just, there's such value in saying, oh shit, it's happening right now. I'm getting reactive. Because if we don't do that, we just go unconscious immediately, right? We go
100%.
into the pattern of reactivity. So name it out loud is step number two.
Hold on, number two, real quick. I want to share something to put an exclamation on this point, which is I've had this version of me in the car where I turn into Officer Vroman. I named him, where somebody like some sweet old person will have like just been listening to music and cut me off, but I'm like, you bitch, you know, like I just have this like reaction and then the other day I was like, oh, I see Officer Vroman like entered the scene. I'm like, what is it that you want? I had a talk with myself in the car. I was like, what do you want, Officer Vroman? Why so much anger towards this could be sweet as pie woman over here? Why'd you call her a bitch? You know, like, what is that? And I'd be like, oh, you're scared that if she doesn't pay attention, that somebody will get hurt. If she doesn't follow the rules, then your family could get hurt, you know, whatever, that something bad's going to happen. All you want is for good to happen. That's why you're getting so intense. So, like I see your heart. I see your heart, Officer Vroman. You're a good dude. You're not just an asshole. And that was interesting for me. I just wanted to share how I have experienced that, naming it, but then also having a quick conversation of like, what is it that you really want? What is it that you're really afraid of? Then I'm not so judgmental for that.
It's so valuable, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about is in the clinical sense is internal family systems, is parts work.
Yes.
Right? And being able to communicate with the different parts of us is very important. And we don't, you know, I think sometimes as guys, we don't like to think that there's different parts of us at play, but there are.
Totally.
Right? And sometimes they have very opposing aims. And so you kind of need to start to get familiar on this, you know, the part that you're talking about is the loyal soldier, right? That's trying to protect, that's trying to provide, that's trying to get shit right, that's trying to take care of the family. And that part of us can be brilliant. A mentor of mine said that about this part of me, this like loyal soldier. He's like, you deploy a tank to kill a mosquito. Like that's your
Yeah.
tactic, and
Right.
that's so
Right.
true. Like I have a huge amount of energy and force and power. And so when it comes out, like, if my wife and I get into conflict, because she's very, she's part Lebanese and part German. And so she's just like a fierce firecracker. And I love that about her. And when we get into conflict, sometimes the part of me will come out and we've labeled each other's parts. She's the point prover and I'm the jackhammer. And so when we get into conflict, I can go into this place where I'm just like, I'm just fucking jackhammering in, like I'm right and you're wrong, and this is why, and I'm fucking, bah, 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 bah. And she'll see, I'll know that is how I get it. I've got it. And I've heard her say that 2 or 3 times. I'm like, oh shit, I'm jackhammering right now. And so, we have this method in conflict in our relationship where I'll say you're point proving, and it'll be a cause for her to pause and step back and say like, okay. Or she'll say you're jackhammering, and I'll say like, and then, but it's funny how quickly those types of tools can diffuse the situation. Like in the book, I talk about date a woman that you want to do conflict with, because it's going to happen, right? You're gonna get into whatever, date a partner that you want to get into conflict with, because it's going to happen. Nobody's
Totally.
perfect, and nobody's the Buddha, nobody's Christ. You're going to get into conflict with your partner. And because the best relationships in life, they actually evoke our pain. They evoke our trauma. They evoke our suffering. Why? Because those parts of us are trying to be healed, right? We're hurt in relationships, and we try and heal in relationships. And so what I see a lot of men struggling with is that in their intimate relationships, all of their shit starts to come out. And it's like, well, yeah, that's actually how we're designed as human beings. We're social creatures, and we were hurt socially, and so we try and heal socially. So anyway, should I go to the other two?
Yes. And before we do, I just want to I want to mention that statement of the best relationships evoke pain is really fascinating. And I'm also noticing something in myself, Connor, as you keep talking, that the part of life that I'm in right now is understanding the contrast of statements in our life, like of be and do, or just stop talking and start talking. And then all of what's in between is trying to understand how to apply all these tools is the greatest struggle for me right now. So the more tools that I have, it's wonderful. And I now have more choice, which oftentimes makes things more complicated to what to do, in any given situation, and what is the right approach. I just noticed that in myself as I continue to go deeper and deeper into this work. I mean, at 47, 2 kids, 13 and 18, or 13 and 8.
So first off, you look younger than I do, so fuck you. But also good work.
Thanks, man.
And what I would say is, I think like Einstein had a great quote about this, where he said the rational mind is a faithful servant and the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. And we've created a culture that honors the servant of the rational mind and has forgotten the gift of the intuitive mind. And I think what many men often undervalue and underestimate is their gut. It's their intuitive intelligence. And we've disconnected from that as men, and we've very much allowed that to be a female quality. But if you listen to really, I've had the fortune to work with, world famous musicians and rock stars and rappers and Olympic athletes and Fortune 500 entrepreneurs and billionaires. I mean, you just name it. And when I listen to them, part of their success is always intuition based. It's non-linear. And the challenging part about self-improvement and self-reflection and any kind of self-discovery is that it's a non-linear process, right? Healing is not linear. And this is the challenge that a lot of men face, is when they're starting to move towards a different path, it actually requires them to be okay with the unknown, to get comfortable with, I don't know how this is going to unfold. There's no 5-step plan. you know, to finding my purpose. You know, it's like it just doesn't exist. We want it and our rational mind wants it. And there's people that have created rational guides for some of these things, but they're often shallow and they lack in the depth and the sustenance and the sort of like nutrients that we require, because we need to move towards the unknown territory. And men that are willing to do that benefit from it greatly. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
All right.
Or
Thanks for
47
letting
years
me.
old. Leave it, man.
Thanks for letting me continually interrupt our process here. So notice the signs, name it, and then what's next on the list?
So next on the list is say what you're actually feeling. Now this one might require a pause. So I'm just going to say between step 2 and 3, you might need a pause.
Yep.
Depending on how reactive you've already become, depending on how emotionally flooded it might be, depending on whether you're prone to shutdown and disconnection, or whether you're prone to blowing up and, you know, becoming volatile. So say what you're actually feeling. Are you feeling hurt? Do you feel embarrassed? Do you feel ashamed? You know, I think this is very common for a lot of the men that I work with, where they get something wrong with their wife or their girlfriend or their kids or a coworker or whatever. And that other person points it out, and immediately that man becomes defensive. You know, he's not becoming defensive because he's angry or he disagrees. He's becoming defensive because he feels embarrassed, you know, or because he feels ashamed of the fact that he forgot something, he dropped the ball, you know, he is out of integrity. And that's very challenging for, and you know, I said in the book, it's easier for a man to say fuck you than it is to say I'm hurt, you know, so much easier. And so step 3 is say what you're actually feeling. You know, do you feel abandoned? Feel anxious? Do you feel like deprioritized? Do you feel disrespected? You know, all of those things are very valuable. I remember my wife and I got into a bit of a conflict in the beginning of our relationship. We were at a friend's 40th birthday party, and I don't even remember exactly what she said, but she did something and she said something in front of other people that felt very disrespectful. And I just remember looking at her, and I was, you know, just in front of a couple of people. I said, "Hey, don't say that to me." And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. And then later on, she didn't give any pushback. She didn't get upset. She kind of gave me a look like, what are you doing? And, you know, I don't think I like that. And later on, you know, we had a bit of a dialogue about it. And I said, listen, you know, when you did that, when you said that, I felt really disrespected, and I didn't like that. And rather than me launching in, how could you, and what's wrong with you? And, you know, rather than me shaming her, I just said, listen, I felt disrespected. And that's not the type of relationship that I want to be in, is, you know, feeling disrespected by my partner. You know, I want you to always have my back and see the best in me. And she took it immediately, you know, and was able to hear it because I was coming from my internal experience, not saying, you know, you made me feel this way and you're in the wrong and you shouldn't have done that, but rather saying, you know, this is the impact that your actions had on me. So say what you're actually feeling. And then step 4 is shift attention from your mind to your body, from cognition to sensation. Specifically, shift your awareness from your thoughts to your breath and your body. So our breath is the sort of tool that we can use that oscillates us between our stressed part of the nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, and the calm state of the nervous system, which is the parasympathetic. So when we get really worked up as men, especially if we're angry or we're anxious, what happens for most guys is that all the energy starts to rise up in the body, and then it just accumulates in their head, especially if they're anxious or frustrated. And when that happens, you're screwed, because you're just stuck in your thoughts. All of your awareness, all of your consciousness, all of your focus, all of your attention, it's just on, why did you do that? Why did he say that? Da, 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 da. So we need to be able to breathe and move some of our awareness back down to the body. What am I feeling right now in my chest? How do my hands feel? How do my feet feel? Can I feel my ass sitting on the chair? You know, what's happening in my belly? Do I feel tension? Do I feel constriction? You know, do I feel cold? and start to move some of that awareness down in the body. And what will naturally start to happen is that by doing this, you're practicing something called regulation. So
Yeah.
you're actually de-escalating your own neurology, your own nervous system. And when you return to the breath and you start to breathe a little bit deeper, when people say, "Well, just take a deep breath," there's merit to that, because when you take a nice deep inhale in through the nose and you take a longer exhale, what eventually starts to happen if you do that for about 60 seconds or 2 minutes is that your heart rate will naturally start to come down. And when your heart rate starts to come down and you slow down your respiratory rate per minute, that signals to your brain and your nervous system, I can cool down. And so it's
Yes.
the stress hormones, and it puts us back into a more calm, relaxed, grounded state. So this is the work and the superpower that I think every man should work on personally, and the thing that I think has really changed my life for the better.
Why not swap 3 and 4? Why is shift from the mind to the body not first, and then say what you're feeling once you've tuned in?
You can, if you want, if that works for you. I think, again, I don't know if I said this before, but Jung said that the first step in the therapeutic process is confession. And so sometimes in order for us to really shift into body orientation, we just have to admit, like, this is actually what's going on inside of me.
Yeah.
Now, if you're somebody that's prone to really getting flooded, getting very reactive very quickly, you just have like a short fuse, then you might want to switch those two, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're somebody that shuts down immediately and you just cut off, actually, if you're somebody that shuts down immediately and cuts off and starts to pull away, it's almost even more important that you prioritize number 3, that you prioritize saying, right, I'm starting to shut down, I'm starting to cut off, and what I'm actually feeling is anxious or embarrassed, because most of the time that's the thing that we don't want to do in those moments.
Yeah. Dude,
this is a blast.
This was really great. What's going through my head right now is got to do an in-person show sometime when you're in Austin, and we got to block more time for the next conversation, because I really don't want this to end. So many more things that I want to learn from you and with you, because I think that you have such a unique perspective with the work that you're doing with men. And I just know this is the beginning of something great, man. I'm really appreciative of you being here today. I want to say to the guys to pick up a copy of the book, Men's Work. I'm sure it's available anywhere, Connor, that these guys are going to be looking. I picked up my copy on Amazon. But if they want to learn more about you, they can go check out your podcast, ManTalks. They can go to Amazon and get the book. Am I missing anything?
You can follow me on Instagram at ManTalks. Post stuff there all the time. And then, just head on over to the website, mantalks.com. You can find the book there. You'll find the podcast there. That's probably the best place to go. And maybe you and I will have to have, I'm actually going to be, I think, in Austin at the end of March for a podcast tour. So maybe.
Nice.
Yeah. Maybe we'll just block it off and jam for a couple hours and do our thing. I think,
dude, I love it.
Great. You're a great host, man. You got some really solid questions, and you intervene at actually the perfect moment. So I really valued this conversation today.
Yeah, I appreciate it as well. These are things that I genuinely want to know myself, and I would imagine that there's other people that are having similar situations. At least that's my imagination leads me to that. But I here's something. I'm just going to seed our next conversation, Connor, that I want to talk about forgiveness with you. And I'm going to do something I've never done at the end of a show, by the way. It's like you create a little cliffhanger at the end of an episode. So you're like, I got to come back for the next one. Is this idea that there are things in my life that I can look back on that were traumatic for me, say in relationships. And I really felt that I did the work of forgiveness, and then it resurfaced again in the future, down the road. And I was like, I thought I dealt with that. So I'm very, very excited to maybe pick up on our next conversation and get your take on that of healing, which we talked about today, but then healing again, right when you think you did all the healing and then something comes up and you're like, fuck all this work that I did. Like it's worthless. It's here again. Let's let that be the cliffhanger for our next conversation. Is there anything you want to say, man, if you want to have the final word?
No, I just want to thank you for having me on. This was a great conversation, and I've done, I really mean that I've done dozens and dozens and dozens of interviews in the last couple of weeks, and this was by far one of my favorite. And so, thanks so much for the work that you're doing, specifically with dads and prioritizing family. I think I really do think that's the work that the world needs. I think that's the world that the work that our communities need. So thank you. And to all the guys that are out there, just keep going, man. Just keep going. If you're tuning into the show, you're doing something right. That's it.
Yeah, agreed, man. Connor Beaton, everybody. The book is Men's Work. Get a copy, get 10, share it with your friends. Take care, Connor.